What if gravity works sideways for a day? This question comes from Marcus, who asks, if gravity suddenly started pulling everything sideways instead of downward for exactly 24 hours, what would happen to Earth and everything on it? Let's imagine it's a perfectly normal Wednesday morning when the laws of physics decide to take a coffee break. At exactly 6 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, gravity stops pulling toward Earth's center and instead starts pulling everything horizontally toward the east. Every single object on the planet suddenly experiences a sideways force of 9.8 meters per second squared. The first victims would be everyone who's sleeping. Within seconds, billions of people would find themselves tumbling out of bed and sliding across their bedroom floors toward the eastern wall. Coffee mugs would shoot off tables, cars would skid sideways down streets, and every loose object on Earth would begin its eastward journey. But here's where it gets really interesting. Earth itself weighs about 6 trillion kilograms, and it's spinning at roughly 1,670 kilometers per hour at the equator. When gravity flips sideways, all that mass doesn't just stop moving, the planet would continue rotating, but now everything on its surface would be experiencing a constant sideways pull. Within the first hour, chaos would be absolute. Every building taller than a few stories would start leaning dangerously eastward. The structural engineering of our entire civilization is designed around the assumption that heavy things fall down, not sideways. Skyscrapers would begin groaning and cracking as their foundations struggled against forces they were never designed to handle. Ocean water, no longer held in place by downward gravity, would start flowing eastward in massive tsunamis. The Pacific Ocean would begin draining toward Asia, while the Atlantic would surge toward Europe and Africa. Coastal cities would face either devastating floods or complete drainage, depending on their position relative to the gravitational flow. Aircraft in flight would face an impossible situation. Planes stay airborne by generating lift against downward gravity, but with gravity pulling sideways, every plane in the sky would suddenly find itself in an uncontrolled sideways dive. Pilots would have minutes to figure out how to land on runways that are now effectively vertical walls. But the most terrifying effect would be on Earth's atmosphere. The air we breathe is held around our planet by gravitational attraction. With gravity now pulling sideways, our entire atmosphere would start flowing eastward like a massive wind. The air pressure would become wildly uneven, creating hurricane-force winds everywhere as the atmosphere tried to redistribute itself. By hour 6, the eastern edges of continents would be experiencing crushing atmospheric pressure as all of Earth's air piled up against them, while the western edges would be approaching vacuum conditions. People in western areas would struggle to breathe as the air literally flowed away from them. The strangest part would be how humans adapt. After the initial panic, people would figure out that they could still walk normally. They'd just be walking on what used to be walls. Stairs would become impossible to climb eastward but easy to descend westward. Every building would effectively rotate 90 degrees in terms of usability. Underground structures would become the only safe spaces. Subway systems and basement levels would suddenly become horizontal corridors where people could move normally. The entire human population would be forced underground, creating the largest mass migration in history in a matter of hours. But here's the twist that changes everything. After exactly 24 hours, when gravity suddenly flips back to normal, the aftermath would be far worse than the sideways day itself. Everything that had slid, flowed, or fallen eastward would now plummet straight down from wherever it had ended up. All the water that had flowed eastward and piled up against continental edges would come crashing back down as waterfalls of unprecedented scale. Buildings that had been leaning eastward would collapse as gravity reasserted its downward pull. Every car, tree, and loose object that had slid eastward would now fall from whatever height it had reached. The atmosphere, which had spent 24 hours flowing eastward and piling up in compressed masses, would rush back westward to equalize pressure, creating global windstorms that would make hurricanes look like gentle breezes. Most shocking of all, millions of people who had sought shelter on what were formerly walls and ceilings would suddenly find themselves dozens of feet in the air when gravity returned to normal. The casualty count from the return to normal gravity would dwarf anything from the sideways day itself. But the strangest consequence would be psychological. Humanity would never again take the direction of gravity for granted. We'd realize that the simple fact that things fall down rather than sideways is not some universal constant, but a delicate condition that keeps our entire world functioning. Architecture would be revolutionized. New buildings would be designed to handle gravitational forces from any direction. More importantly, humans would develop a completely new relationship with the concept of up and down, understanding for the first time that these directions are not absolute truths but temporary conveniences. The day gravity went sideways would become the day humanity learned that even our most basic assumptions about reality are more fragile than we ever imagined.